I had this really good childhood friend named Faith, and we would play games and sports and stuff together. And one of the things that we would do when we would hang out with our whole families, because they were all friends, is we would play this game called Snaps, or maybe game isn't quite the right term. It was a secret communication activity. And so I would have my dad or her dad whisper the name of a famous athlete in my ear. And then I would have to communicate that to Faith using sneaky, secret, in front of everybody communication. So Dad would whisper like, Daryl Strawberry. Okay. So I'd say, all right, the category is athlete. And I would say something like this. See if you can get what I'm saying to you. Try not to miss any of the clues. Remember every word I say. Will you be able to figure this one? And she'd be like, Strawberry, Daryl Strawberry. And everybody would go, whoa, that's amazing. That's incredible. And the trick was, of course, that the first letter of each phrase represents a consonant, and snaps, A, E, I, O, U, etc., you get how it works, would represent vowels. And you'd combine all of that together, and then the quicker she or I could figure out what the code was pointing toward, the quicker we could answer, and it would just blow people's minds. And they'd watch for hand movements or eye contact or things like that. And we would change up the rhythm, snap backwards, give cues. It was like audibles at the line of scrimmage or fake signals in baseball. It was really, really fun. But what made it awesome for us as kids is that everything meant something. And the more little cues and signals we would pass back and forth, the more we would understand. And the more that went on, the more our parents, who are the smart ones in the relationship because they're adults and good parents, they wouldn't understand. And likewise, in Matthew chapter 13, we see Jesus switch from straight through the front door, overt theological teaching to these cryptic parables. And after just one parable, the disciples are like, well, why don't you just do the thing that you're awesome at and communicate directly with everybody so they'll get it? It worked on us, it'll work on them. And Jesus goes on to say, here is why I speak in parables. The knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them meaning the crowds, the squishy middle, and the people who reject Jesus. Whoever has will be given more, and he'll have an abundance. Whoever doesn't have, even what he has will be taken from him. So the idea is, if you get the kingdom code, the more I talk about the kingdom code, even in kingdom code, the more you're going to get it. And if you don't get it or you reject it, then the more I talk about the kingdom, the more you're going to get frustrated and reject it even harder. He goes on in verse 13. He says, this is why I speak to them in parables. Oh, that's smoking gun answer. Whatever he says next, I guess it's going to be pretty important. Though seeing, they don't see. Though hearing, they don't hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. Now, to the attentive original audience member, Jesus wouldn't have needed to spell out, in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, because everybody would have known, oh, that's Isaiah 6. And probably a whole bunch of you remember that's Isaiah 6. Even if you didn't remember the exact chapter, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. There's that stuff where Isaiah gets signed up to be a prophet, and then the first thing he's told to do is to go and communicate to the people of Israel way, way back in the day, hundreds of years before Jesus. But he's told to go and teach them, even though he's also told they're not going to get it. They're not going to listen to you. So we run back here to Isaiah chapter 6. And Isaiah 6:1, this is what Jesus is drawing on to explain why he teaches in parables. It says, in that year, the king Uzziah died. I, that's Isaiah, saw the Lord seated on the throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple, and there were a bunch of angels all over the place, and they're calling out, holy is the Lord God Almighty, the earth's full of his glory, and everything starts shaking, and there's smoke, and I freaked out, and I'm crying, woe to me, I'm ruined, I'm a man of unclean lips, I live among unclean people. And then one of these ridiculous-looking angels comes down. He's got a hot coal, and he takes it for the tongs from the altar, and he puts it on my mouth. He's like, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for. And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, here am I. Send me. So we got this whole setup about this prophet, Isaiah, who lives in the year that the king Uzziah died, which was a bummer for everybody because Uzziah was a really good king of Judah. He was around for a huge chunk of years in the middle of the 8th century, the 700s BC. He built a bunch of stuff. He defended the borders effectively. He was a pretty good dude. But then at the end of his life, he was like, I think I should be allowed to go into the Holy of Holies. Why can't I do that? And he goes in there, but you're not allowed to do that. And he gets leprosy and he dies from it. And so the whole nation is shaken. Why is God acting like that? We don't have our physical human leader anymore. Our compasses are spinning. And then Isaiah, who's like, well, what do I prophesy now? Has this whole vision. And this is where it gets crazy, and this is what Jesus is drawing on in terms of what Isaiah gets told to do. So Isaiah's like, here I am, send me. And then God responds to that and says, go and tell this people, you will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. This people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. That is the rendering from the Greek translation of the Hebrew called the Septuagint that dates to a couple hundred years before Jesus. This is the version of the Bible that was in circulation at the time of Jesus. The more Hebrew rendering that we reconstruct from what's called the Masoretic text says, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving, make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull and their eyes closed. So even in the Hebrew rendering versus the Greek rendering, there's a little bit of question about who's responsible for it. Is it that these people are just dolts and they can't hear anything or see anything, as it's framed in the Septuagint and in the way Jesus quotes it? Or is it more about God sending his prophet Isaiah out to inflict these characteristics on them because God wants to make a point in his judgment? Well, as we've seen looking through the book of Matthew, especially yesterday, both can be true. So again, picking it up in Matthew 13:13, Jesus says, this is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they don't see. Though hearing, they don't hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. And at this point in our travels through Matthew together, you might be like, oh, I recognize that pattern. Okay, you got a prophet, and in this way, the words of the prophet are fulfilled. But if you look a little closer, this is actually different than all of the other patterns we've seen established. First of all, it's Jesus himself, not Matthew, the narrator, who is saying that the prophecy is fulfilled thusly. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. So those are Jesus' words. Those are in red. But further, this is the first prophecy we see being fulfilled by the behavior of the crowds. Up until this point, all of the prophecies have been fulfilled pretty much by Jesus' stuff. He was born this way. He was raised in this place. He said this thing. He did this thing. He healed our infirmities. He took these things upon him. All of it points back to Jesus. But here, the prophecy of Isaiah is not fulfilled in the behavior, works, or character of Jesus. It is fulfilled in the behavior and the character and the works of the people who are rejecting Jesus. In other words, Jesus is pointing toward the collective cultural initiating event that started the people of Judah toward decline that would ultimately result in their capture and captivity at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians. He's pointing to that moment where their leader got it wrong, where their hearts got it wrong, where the whole thing went sideways, where Isaiah and his whole prophesying routine became even necessary to push back on the behavior and the thinking of the people of Judah. He's picking that awful moment, and he is likening that awful moment to how people are being right now as they hear him speak. Now go back to what we talked about with the Pharisees and their mindset. They've got all these bonus rules and laws and all of this stuff because they want to make sure that they never go back. They're like the prisoner that got out, and I'm never going back to the joint ever. We are never going to make that mistake again. We built a second temple after the first one got destroyed, but it wasn't as good, and the presence of God wasn't there, and it's because we didn't take things seriously enough. We didn't honor the law well enough, so we're going to make even extra laws, and this time, collectively, culturally, we are going to get it right, and we are doing much better right now. They don't really have an explanation for the whole Roman occupation thing. We'll figure that out later, but we're doing better, and we're going to hold our feet to the fire, and we are going to get these things right, and we are going to earn God's favor again. And yet, despite all of that supposed progress, here we are in Matthew chapter 13, and Jesus is like, no, you're just like the people of Judah when they started to get it completely wrong in the Old Testament in a way that ultimately led to complete calamity. Jesus' words here sound pretty harsh to you and me as modern audience members a couple thousand years after the fact, but this would have been withering rhetoric to the original audience. They're in the process with hard hearts and closed ears and shut eyes of rejecting God in their midst. And we're going to see that Jesus likens himself to the temple. They're about to see that temple destroyed and the place where God dwells among them right now taken from them once again. But now Jesus flips it around in verse 16 back to the disciples who were asking the question. He said, "But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For I tell you the truth, many prophets and righteous men longed to see what you see but didn't see it, and to hear what you hear but did not hear it." And it's not just the righteous people, the righteous leaders, the righteous prophets of the past who were looking forward to the advent of the Messiah, to the work of the Messiah, who saw this stuff. It's also people standing right there. It's the people who were right there in the cove with Jesus in the boat listening to these things. The people who were over there watching the miracle happen with the paralytic guy, the dude whose arm was withered off. All of the people saw this stuff, but only the disciples and the other people who are following in one sense or another really got it, really processed what was happening, and were able to detect and appreciate and embrace the beautiful thing when it was right in front of them. So there's a question that has to be answered here, and that is the kingdom real? Is the king real? I mean, if so, why are these people throwing it out? Why can't they hear it? Why are they rejecting it? And so the parables simultaneously then are going to communicate deep, abiding, eternal truths about the nature of the kingdom and how it's going to unfold. But in that part about how it's going to unfold, the parables are also going to speak into the moment and the rejection that's occurring when it seems like if this thing is so true and so real, there shouldn't be any rejection occurring. Jesus had to speak to that stuff, and part of what the parables do is afford him a unique way to go about addressing that. Or to put it another way, it's like snaps. If your eyes have been opened to the code, the parables are beautiful and amazing and enlightening, and they take you even deeper into truth and new ways of communicating and understanding. And if you don't know the code and your eyes haven't been opened to what that is, it's probably just going to be frustrating. We'll see how it plays out as we move forward tomorrow into the long-promised interpretation on the part of Jesus of the parable of the sower. Most of the clues I'm giving you are very important. Try not to miss anything. Totally focus on what I'm saying. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.